Well, this is Eber Phelps with my first report from the Capitol here during the 2017 session. It's been pretty busy for me this session compared to when I was in the legislature before. As far as committee assignments, I've been on the House Appropriations Committee, and then we also do time on the higher education budget, and I'm also on local government. So the Appropriations Committee has really been busy. What I'm charged with right now, as far as being on the Higher Education Committee, is we've been hearing all the budgets for the various Regents institution here in the state of Kansas, as well as the state library and also the State Historical Society. So as we've worked through those, our subcommittee makes recommendations to the full Appropriations Committee. So the last couple weeks, each day we hear reports on various budgets, whether it be for K-12 education or Department of Transportation, Department of Education, and so forth. So it's been pretty interesting and also keeping everybody pretty busy. Now, the big thing this week, though, that we just went through was the tax bill hearings and debate on the House floor. If anybody's been following that, that was House Bill 2178. And so what we find ourselves in here as we are working through the whole budgetary process is that we are short $350 million, and that's for fiscal year 2017, which we're in right now and will come to a close on June 30th. So in the meantime, we're going to end up with a shortfall, so we have to figure out how to come up with the money for that. This tax bill should do that, and in fact, it will do that. And then as we move on, we work on the 2018 budget and then also the 2019. Probably some of the highlights of the 2178 bill, which, by the way, on general orders received 83 votes in favor. That dropped off on final action yesterday when the vote count was 76 to 48. Still a pretty huge passage of that bill. 2817, as many of us have said, begins, as they say, the long road back to responsibility for Kansas. Because the current tax plan that we have in place that was implemented in 2012 has been less than stellar as far as coming up with the results that I think the governor and his staff had anticipated. We lost about 9,400 jobs last year in 2016, and subsequently, when we look at the rationale behind the governor's 2012 tax plan, it was supposed to create a number of jobs in our state and bring businesses here, and it just has done the opposite. We've lost businesses, and we haven't seen the growth in the job sector at all. So what this bill also does, the main thing, you're hearing about the LLC, the Limited Liability Corporation tax loophole. What this bill did when it was passed in 2012, I should say the tax bill in 2012, it allowed 330,000 Kansans to be exempted from income tax. And obviously, when we look at our three sources of revenue, that being property tax, sales tax, and income tax, eliminating that much income tax has really had a negative effect on the overall economy of our state as far as the budget goes. So it closes that loophole. The bill also, as you'll hear, repeals the March to Zero. In other words, the governor had anticipated ending income tax at some point as this bill and this whole policy moved forward. Obviously, that needs to stop, and we need to get back to pretty much 2012 type of a tax structure, but there will be some reforms on that as well. This bill returns Kansas to what we would call a fair tax structure. In other words, everyone will pay their fair share. So what we did in this bill was actually created an additional tax bracket. It had been reduced to 2, and so by increasing it to and adding an additional tax bracket, that should have some very positive results. And then finally, when you look at this and see that there's an additional tax bracket and so forth, one of the things that you need to remind people, or I need to, is the fact that this is actually lower tax rates than were in 2012. So when you're hearing people out there saying that we're taxing the poor with this, actually their tax rate's going to be lower than what it was in 2012, so there was a cut there. The one thing we probably need to exercise around here, and I tell a lot of the younger folks, is that you really have to exercise patience. This problems didn't happen overnight, and so or the damage, so it will probably not be fixed overnight. So we're going to see how the Senate reacts. They had trouble getting off the ground with their tax bill effort last week, I believe it was. This went through the House on the floor with actually no debate. It was introduced, explained, and of course we had all heard about it in our various caucus meetings. And so this was passed without any debate. And over in the Senate, they're still trying to get something going. I'm not sure what their schedule is, but at some point they're going to have to come out with a tax bill so we can then do the rescission bill with the Senate and get things straightened out for the remainder of 2017. One of the things I mentioned that this will take care of, or at least address, some of the shortfalls we're experiencing not only this year but for 2018. It's expected to increase the state's revenue by about $590.2 million. That's in fiscal year 2018, because we're not going to see the results of that in 2017. We're actually going to probably have to do some one-time fixes or one-time sources of money to get through the 2017 budget year. But this will actually put us in pretty good position for 2018. And then after that, it'll be about $460 million a year the following year, providing things go through the way we intend them to go through or would like to see them go through. The bill returns the medical expense itemized deductions to 100%, and it also protects the mortgage interest deduction, which is currently at 50%, and it remains that way. Some of the things coming up, the House Health and Human Services Committee has been addressing the issue of the Medicaid expansion. You'll probably hear that, or you may even hear of it referred to as CanCare expansion. That's our version of Medicaid here in the state of Kansas. And the Health and Human Services Committee had hearings on that this week. They heard from the proponents. And so I believe the way I understand it is they'll probably on Monday take up hearings where they're going to listen to the opponents, and then we'll see if they can pass that. Many people have started to look at the whole Medicaid expansion, not at just the coverage that it'll provide as far as health care coverage, but the fact that this would be an absolute economic boon to us at this time, given our situation we have with our budget. It's estimated now that we've probably passed up on about $1.9 billion. And had we done this, a couple of years ago when states were allowed to expand their Medicaid coverage in their state, we would have had this money coming into the state and probably wouldn't be in the situation we're in right now. I believe that there is a attitude around the legislature right now that this is something that needs to be addressed. So not sure when the final action will be on that, but nonetheless, we will be keeping an eye on that. And as I mentioned, with the $1.9 billion shortfall, or at least loss of revenue from that Medicaid expansion, one of the real concerns here is the effect that this is having on your small, safety net clinics or, your rural hospitals. Presently, I believe there's about 34 of them are under a watch, meaning that their revenues are in, their economic situation, their financial situation is in dire straits. And we've already seen the closure of the Montgomery County Hospital last year, and hopefully we can keep these smaller hospitals open. It probably doesn't affect the urban hospitals such as Via Christi or Stormont Vale here in Topeka, but it still is a great loss to them. Hayes Medical Center has lost a considerable amount of money. They may be able to weather the storm, but it would be a very positive thing for all the hospitals in the state of Kansas if we were able to expand Medicaid. And the number of jobs it would create is pretty significant. And there's I've seen breakdowns for every county, and it would have a nice effect for the Ellis County area as well. The other thing that's coming up here for final action later is the House Bill 2052. That's what we call our rescission bill. We have to make adjustments into the current fiscal year budget, And so we had a hearings, or I should say debate yesterday on the House floor in 2052. That measure did pass on a voice vote and will be coming up for final action uh, probably later today or first thing Monday. And then we are, trying to make those various adjustments. And as I mentioned earlier in the program, probably with the rescission bill here, or I should say the current fiscal year budget, we're going to have to do some kind of one-time money adjustments, and then we get more solid footing as we move forward for the 2018 budget. We will have some deadlines coming up. Everybody watches the calendar. This time of the session, you have a lot of deadlines coming up as far as when bills can be introduced, and we've hit those where individuals have passed that time when an individual can introduce legislation. We will then approach what we call turnaround, which is the procedural halfway point of the session, and that's when the work completed in the House goes over to the Senate and vice versa. So we'll see what the Senate has, what kind of products they've been putting out. Other thing that has drawn a lot of attention this session, of course, is the concealed carry issue on college campuses, and there's a big pushback from the college, administrators, presidents, chancellors, as well as the campus police departments, and also the student bodies. Various surveys show that they are definitely opposed to having the concealed carry issue on campus, especially when it doesn't require any kind of training. So that bill has had, I think, some debate in the Fed and State Committee, I believe. And one of the things that was very disappointing is hospitals are exempted from the concealed carry law here in the state of Kansas. But one hospital that doesn't fit into that is Kansas University Medical Center. And so there was a hearing the other day, or a bill introduced to exempt them as well. And that bill failed on a very close vote. I think it was 11 to 10. And so they're very disappointed and very fearful at Kansas Medical Center as far as the impact that will have. So that's kind of one of those issues that's pretty contentious, and it'll be out there for a while. As I mentioned, we'll be seeing some final action coming up by the Senate here. Hopefully they get a tax bill, and we can talk about that in the next program, as well as go into a little bit more detail on the House rescission bill, that being the adjustments to the 2017, the current fiscal year budget. As I mentioned, that ends June 30th.